Chris. Come on, Chris. He can touch it. Go, go.
Chris loved life. He had a strong sense of adventure. He was no angel, but he had a big heart, and he had a very generous nature. Chris was the kind of friend that if you ever had a friend that was your go-to guy, somebody that you knew that you could always count on if you needed a hand with something, somebody that you could count on if you just needed a little support. You know, Christopher was that kind of a guy. He loved the outdoors. He loved athletics. He loved fishing, diving, and he loved his family. He started working in the service industry, in restaurants. He enjoyed cooking. He enjoyed serving. And he became a father at about age 22. They had 2 daughters. He had been living in Melbourne and found a better job opportunity coming back here to Coral Springs. So they came back, and he had only been here 6 or 7 days. He was with a friend who had been a childhood friend of his. They had remained good friends, and they were working in the same restaurant. They went out after work. They got off work about 11 o'clock at night, and they went to a restaurant next to the one they worked at. And they were there for a couple hours, and they were on their way home. And at 1:30 in the morning, while making a left-hand turn, the car that Chris's friend was driving got T-boned by an oncoming car, and Chris was in the passenger side.
How you doing, fellas? Ready for another one, Chris?
See, doesn't answer. Chris!
You ready for another climb? I'm ready for a nap.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from the trauma center closest to our home. And the nurse told me that Christopher had been in an accident and that it would be in my best interest to get there as soon as possible. I work in healthcare. I've worked in many intensive care units, emergency departments. The same hospital that he was at was the hospital that I met his mother in. So I know this drill. I understand when they say, you know, it's in your best interest to come as soon as possible. I knew it was very serious. We're in the waiting room, and about an hour after that, the neurosurgeon comes in to see us, and you could just see a very faint smile on his face. So I knew that, you know, he was going to give us something positive. And he said the pressures weren't as bad as they feared they might be from the swelling and such, and that he was going to be going to the intensive care unit. And I had visited him briefly while he was in the emergency room, and you know, it was difficult, especially being a respiratory therapist. It was difficult to see my son intubated with the tube in his mouth, breathing on a ventilator, and his, you know, face had been so horribly disfigured from the trauma. But when we saw him in the intensive care unit, nothing had changed very much, but it was just such a relief to know that we had received some positive news from the initial surgery. On the second or third day, Carol and I were at the bedside, and Carol said to him, Chris, if you're if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. And he laid there, and he, without moving his head or any other indication of acknowledgement, he put his thumb up. So, I mean, that meant everything to us. His mother, Kathy, was with him most of the time during the day. And, you know, she's also a critical care nurse, and she would do all sorts of, you know, little neuro tests. And she also told us that he was responding appropriately. And so gradually, you know, day by day, he got better and better. He got stronger and stronger. Now, this was on the 23rd of March. On April 1st, he was weaned off the ventilator. So now he was breathing completely on his own. Again, you know, very, very positive signs. On the morning of April 9th was the only morning that either his mother, myself, or my wife, one of us weren't there. And the reason was that we had an appointment with a lawyer to set up a trust account, because we wanted to be sure that we had financial arrangements for not only Christopher's care and his rehab, but also to be sure that, you know, there was going to be support for his two daughters. His daughters were 3 and 5 at the time. I got back to the hospital about 5 p.m. and I went up to the unit. I saw Kathy, and she had a concerned look on her face, and I asked her what was the problem. And she says, well, when I walked in the room, I told the therapist that, you know, the trach didn't sound right. And her response was, well, it's been like that all day. Also, she noticed immediately that he was tachycardic. His heart rate was very high. It was right around 120. And they were having trouble oxygenating him. They were having trouble maintaining his saturations. And on 100% oxygen, he was only 92% saturated, which meant there was something definitely going on. He wasn't ventilating properly. And Kathy asked for some lab tests to be done so that they could measure his carbon dioxide content. And that way, you know, they would know if there was an issue with his ventilation. The results came back showing that he had a compensated respiratory acidosis. He was retaining CO2, he wasn't able to blow it off, so it didn't matter how much oxygen he got. He wasn't going to be ventilating well. And in order for him to compensate the way he did, whatever he had been dealing with, whatever the problem was, it had been present for some time, at least 12 hours.
That was pretty. There's Chris.
Christopher's accident was at 1:30 in the morning, March 22nd, 2009. Christopher coded at 6 p.m. April 9th. And at 6:31 p.m. he was pronounced dead. You know, losing Christopher was as much tragedy as any family can endure. And after I got over just the grief, anger started to come into my feelings, and I knew that there had been, the ball had been dropped. A young, healthy man, a 27-year-old man with a normal, healthy heart and lungs, should not die of cardiopulmonary arrest in an intensive care trauma unit. Something was wrong here. The medical records that we got from the hospital showed that even after Christopher was weaned off the ventilator, he continued to receive morphine, and Ativan, in pretty much the same dosages he received it while he was on the ventilator, even though an order had been written to discontinue it. He had a critical lab value on his lab work. It was either the day before or the day of his resuscitation, which was never reported to the physicians. When we got the blood gas results and confirmed that he wasn't ventilating properly, an order was put in for him to have an X-ray to examine the placement of the tube. When they came up to do the X-ray, they did an AP, an anterior posterior shot. They did not do a lateral or translateral shot. So according to the vertical view of the X-ray, the tube appeared to be in the correct position. Our feeling was that had they done a lateral X-ray, they would have seen that it was too far anterior. As on Christopher's autopsy, it confirmed that there had been a tear, a mediastinal tear, caused by the tube being out of position. So we started looking into a malpractice case. I went to one law firm and they looked at what had happened. They looked at the medical records and my testimony, and they said, well, you've got a very strong case. After they learned more about the hospital that he was in and the situation there, it is the first time I learned about a statute called sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity is an Old English term that basically means you can't sue the king. But in this context, what it refers to is statutory limits on financial liability for institutions like hospitals, tax-supported hospitals, that are protected by the statute. And after being on our third legal team, we were told that at that time, in 2009, in the state of Florida, the statutory limit per claimant was $100,000. We were told that our best option would be to go to mediation, because by their estimates, it would take us at least $250,000 to bring the case to court. So we went to mediation, and we had the lawyers representing the hospital, the lawyers representing the anesthesia group, the lawyers representing the ER physicians, everyone telling us how sorry they were for our loss. And then collectively, they proceeded to offer us a $40,000 settlement. When they left the conference room, I looked to my lawyer and I said, what happened? What just happened here? And he said, Ed, no lawyer will ever admit they've said this, but lawyers representing clients who are covered by or protected by sovereign immunity will tell their clients, what you have here is a free kill. You can offer them anything you want. There's nothing they can do about it.
Nicknamed the Florida AFreeKill law.
It's called the Florida AFreeKill law.
Chances are you or someone you know is a so-called free kill here in the state of Florida.
25-year-old daughter died in the hospital. 25 is a critical age in Florida. That's when you can become what critics of the law call a free kill.
Say hello. There he is.
A free kill is a slang term used amongst medical malpractice lawyers in the state of Florida to describe two different situations, sovereign immunity being one of them, that if the death occurs in a sovereign hospital, it's basically a free kill. Regardless of how extreme the negligence is, there's going to be no monetary recovery. I'm Scott Henratty. I'm an attorney practicing law in the state of Florida for about 26 years. I'm a trial partner currently at Morgan & Morgan. The injured party, the decedent here, Mr. Salazar's son, was treated at a sovereign hospital, a state-run hospital. So sovereign immunity applied. So even though there was malpractice, somebody did something wrong to cause his son's death, the amount that you can possibly recover at that time was limited to $100,000. Medical malpractice cases are very expensive to prosecute. So we would have had to spend more money than we could possibly ever recover. So in the end, it doesn't even make it feasible for us to try to represent someone who's killed in a sovereign hospital. The cost of the litigation would be much higher than anything that could ever be recovered. So it makes absolutely no sense to bring suit. Most states, I know what the rules are in Florida because I practice here. Most states do have some form of sovereign immunity because it comes back from king, and the king being sovereign, so it comes from England ultimately. So most of the states, if not all of them, do have some form of statutory immunity. Anyone who goes to a public hospital in the state of Florida can be affected by the sovereign immunity. Them or a loved one. The only way to fix that is to lobby your legislatures. You have to be proactive in it. They've been proactive over the last few years, again, by raising the limits, but the limits are still too low. But until the legislature changes those limits on the sovereign immunity, people are still going to be victims.
It's 5 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have anything else to record on. I hope this records. Just want to remember what a lucky man I am. The sun's going to be coming up soon. We're going to make breakfast. I think scrambled eggs and hash. We're going to spend the day out in the woods.
There she was, just walking down the street.
Christopher was my son. Christopher was also a loving, precious father. He was a grandson. He was a brother. He was a nephew. The hole that his loss left in the fabric of our life can never be replaced. It's been 15 years since we lost Christopher. In 15 years, there have been some improvement in healthcare delivery systems relative to preventable deaths. But there has been very little change in the statute of sovereign immunity. Every single state has this on their books, some form or another. And the allowances vary from state to state. What I know in Florida is that there has been very little change in the amounts, in the statutory limits. What people need to, what makes me so angry, what bothers me the most is that until it happens to somebody, they have no awareness, they have no knowledge, they have no understanding of the implications of this statute. You sign those papers to be admitted into the hospital, sometimes under a lot of duress. You know, I've been on both sides of the table. I've been on as a clinician, I've been as a patient, I've been as a family member of a patient. I understand the dynamic on both sides. But people have to know. People have to understand, they have to be aware, they have to be willing to fight and take action to make change. Medical error is going to take the life of somebody's son or daughter, somebody's mother or father. But when it happens, pray that people know and are prepared and can deal with not only the grief and the heartache, but the financial consequences, because they last a long time too. When you or someone you love is admitted to a hospital, when you sign those papers, you are saying that you understand all the terms and conditions of your hospitalization. Be sure that you do. Be sure that you know. Be sure that you ask. You know, is this hospital protected by sovereign immunity? Be sure that you are aware before you consent for surgery, before you consent for any kind of a treatment, that you understand what would be the consequences if something goes wrong. You've got a right to know, you've got a right to ask. If not for yourself, then for your loved ones. Learn how this applies where you live. Learn how this applies in the state that you live in. Talk to your legislators. Send them a message. Let them know that you know and that you want change. It is going to happen again. You don't want you or a loved one to be the next free kill. Take action.
Smile. Come on, Jenny, look at it. Smile.
Crazy kids.
And we do want to tell you about a healthcare issue that did not pass. Now, lawmakers filed 5 bills to overturn a Florida law that limits who can sue over medical malpractice deaths. None of those bills made it out of committee.